wanted to tell our customers all about how we enjoyed our time in Finland last week. This lucky six were the lucky six that went over to Kohacon in Finland, Helsinki, Finland. And Kohacon, for anyone that doesn't know, is the annual conference for the Koha library management system. And we, the community, the Koha community, has these conferences once a year, but in different geographic locations every year. So it gets bid for each year, and whoever wins hosts the conference. And so this year it was hosted by the National Library of Finland and took place at the University of Helsinki. The conference itself is a combination of libraries, people from libraries using Koha, and also developers and support companies who support the Koha library management system. And it's usually really well attended, and this year was no exception. One of the additional draws this year was the fact that it was a joint conference between the Perl, which is a software language, Perl, and that's the language that Koha is largely based on and written in. It was the Perl conference as well, PearlCon. So for the first time ever, it was the Perl Kohacon, and we had around, I would say, 30 developers from the Perl community who attended the conference in person as well as online. So I'm going to ask a few questions of the people in the room to see how they got on and what we enjoyed the most. So perhaps first, if I ask what your favorite bit of the conference was, what was the favorite thing that we did or you took part in?
I think many of the talks were interesting, but personally, my favorite part is always the little chats you get in between the talks with maybe people you've met before, or even better, brand new people. And you get to either share what you thought of the talk or get an insight into what the other person does. And I always learn from that, and it's something I when I attend something online, it's always something I miss. So I was really pleased to be able to do that there.
And I think just to add to that, the Koha community is very a close community, and we're very used to dealing with each other on a day-to-day basis, remotely and online and through chat. But to actually see these people who have come such a long way, from New Zealand, from the US, from Europe, to actually see them in person and to speak to them is a real pleasure.
Were there any talks that anyone particularly enjoyed?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one that sort of constantly comes back to mind for me was the one that Chris Cormack did about Indigenous data sovereignty. And I think it was really interesting because it's not something that we typically talk about or think about here in Britain. So it was excellent to sort of have a New Zealander's a sort of view or a Maori view on how that sort of can impact various communities around the world. So yeah, and I think that sort of ties into the ethos that we've got in the Koha community about sort of community as a whole, the concept of community, the concept of sharing, and that ties back into Perl and open source as well. So yeah, I thought that was quite interesting, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I loved that talk as well. I really loved it. And another highlight in a similar vein was seeing the Ukrainian Ambassador to Finland join us for part of one of the days, and that was really initiated by the main organizer, and we should mention Andriy by name, Andriy Nogid, who organized the conference and is a Ukrainian living and working in Finland. And so there was an element of thinking about the situation in Ukraine and libraries in the Ukraine, and how software communities like the Koha community could work with that country to rebuild the services that have been so badly affected by the situation there, after hopefully the situation becomes easier for people. So that was really inspiring in a similar way to have that person attend.
We were given beautiful gifts by Andrew's wife when we arrived, little handmade.
I've got it on my bag.
I was going to say mine's in pride of place in my house now. But yes, it was very moving to see everybody walking around with those on.
I think it reinforced, like we've talked about AFOS as well, but like the idea of community and solidarity, like to say, yeah, this is part of our world as well, and this is how we can help each other.
How were the technical talks? Did any of the more technical people here have any highlights?
I think there was a really good range, especially because we were joint with the Pearl community as well. There were some talks that were obviously a bit more Pearl specific, but it was good to sort of see some different elements from the Pearl community and what advances they're trying to make there, what the newest sort of movements that they're trying to push forward are. So I think there was a really good range. There's definitely some that I need to catch up on as well that I didn't get the chance to see because they were at the same time as others. So that's something I'm definitely going to be doing over the next week.
Yeah, and I should mention, and we'll put links on this video, all of the talks delivered as part of the main 3-day conference were live streamed, but also are there for posterity. And we're gonna we've put out a blog article actually highlighting some of the talks and contributions we made, and links to the live stream for those. But any other talks that are on the schedule that I'll put a link to, they're available on the live stream as well. So do have a look and catch up on things that you want to catch up on. And I suppose with that in mind, we did go, the 6 of us, to contribute and gave talks, but obviously we're there to learn as well. So is there anything in particular that you think you've learned from your time at Kohacon this year?
Well, I think Kiitos and
thank you.
Thank you in Finnish, yeah.
A few different bits of the Finnish language, and also I think just a little bit about Finnish culture in general, which was really interesting. It was a really interesting part of the trip that I hadn't really, it sounds silly, but when you go on holiday, you sort of think about the destination, you think about what you're going to get out of it from a cultural standpoint. But I think I went into it with a very work mindset of thinking, it's a work trip. So it sort of surprised me a little bit how many sort of different bits of Scandinavian and Finnish culture I learned about and picked up. So that was very interesting for me, definitely.
From 15 or so years of working with Koha, I finally learned that it's not a wave in the logo, it's a fern frond. I never knew that.
There we go. That's a very good thing to have learned.
Yeah, Jake's already mentioned it, but I learned about Indigenous data sovereignty thanks to Chris Cormack's talk, and it's definitely something I want to read on more. I also learned, thanks to Paul Derscheid's lightning talk, that he just developed a plugin to display library events in the Koha pack, so it's something I want to try out. And like one of the other many things I learned and I wanted to mention is from visiting Oodi, Helsinki's public libraries, how they deal with reservations collection, which is a little bit different from what my local library does here in England.
Yeah, I mean, I also learned from the lightning talks, but what I learned, I suppose, was structurally that the lightning talks was a really good, and this came from the Pearl conference organizers actually, was a really good way of shaping part of the session. So it's definitely something that I would suggest and bring forward to future conferences, to use that lightning talks structure and the little adverts, of which I did a couple in between the lightning talks, was great. So what do we think would be the most useful things from the conference for our customer libraries to look at in particular? Are there any particular talks or any particular aspects of the conference or outputs of the conference that we think the libraries that weren't able to attend in person might get out of this?
I think, yeah, sorry, go on.
No, sorry, go on.
I just noted 3 talks that I thought for somebody who wasn't there, it'd be very practical to look at. And one of them is Gladys Catlin's talk on managing pages and HTML customizations on the OPAC, because she gave a really good overview of how to use it, but also plenty of ideas of things you can do. I really liked Arthur Suzuki's lightning talk on how to be a first-time speaker, because he was a first-time speaker the day before, and then the Wednesday afternoon he said, this is what I learned and this is the advice I can give, and it's such a good talk. And finally, Catherine Fisher's talk on community participation, I think it's called How to Give Your Koha to Koha. So those are my recommendations.
Yeah, I think I'd like to echo the one about Katrine's talk. I think that's a really good introduction to getting involved. And then alongside that as well, Nick Clemens' talk, he did a good talk about how to actually format any submissions you want to make and get them community ready so that they're able to be easily reviewed. So I think that's a really good starting point.
I think from a more technical point of view, the Jonathan Gerard did some talk on the KTD, the Koha testing Docker. So anybody who's interested in getting involved in having their own standalone Koha, doing some testing. It was interesting to me because it's sort of how I came into the conference with Matt's help, setting up the KTD this time. And actually, you know, Matt's talk on starting out as a Koha developer was excellent as well. So probably very inspiring to anybody who's feels like dipping their toe into the water of a little bit of development.
Yeah, I thought that was wonderful. I was waiting for another talk, and the lady who was helping record the technical talks was expressing to a colleague that she was inspired by Matt's presentation to take up some coding, which I thought was great.
There you go, Matt. You're an inspiration to us all.
Some good feedback, at least.
Just to sort of drop my penny's worth in as well, I think I'd recommend watching any of the talks that were done by the Finnish libraries, because I've, you know, having worked in a library before, I found it really quite insightful as to how they do certain things differently, and also how they culturally view libraries. And I think there was some quite inspirational stuff in there, along with a lot of sort of technical talk of how they sort of manage the libraries at a sort of a ground level as well. But yeah, there's definitely some interesting little gems in there for sure.
So perhaps building a little bit on the idea that Finnish libraries might be culturally different or culturally in a different place to ours. Does anyone want to talk about their favorite bit of visiting Helsinki? Hint, hint.
Oh, what could we possibly say?
All of it.
What I'm referring to specifically, of course, was the Udi Public Library, which takes absolute pride of place in the centre of Helsinki. So you just cannot miss this new
really
building.
inspiring.
Yeah, it's right opposite their government parliament building, and on a big open square. And it's very striking architecture, but that's not the most striking thing about it. And I'll hand over to maybe Ud or Jonathan to talk.
Well, I think. Oh, go on.
No, go on. I'll add afterwards.
No, I was just going to say, you know, it's absolutely incredible, and just shows the value of properly investing in libraries. I mean, for me as a musician, to be able to be, if I was able to go into the library with a library card, a free library card, to borrow an instrument and go into a fully working recording studio, which is what you could do at Udi.
All for free.
All for free. It would be a dream.
Yeah, for definite. I think there was also, from a technical standpoint as well, and a sort of someone who's interested in technology, some of the computer equipment they had there was absolutely astounding. You know, they sort of had 1,500 plus euro computers there that were all sort of geared up and kitted out for you to do sort of CAD or game development, or, you know, all these sort of things that you just can't really do on a home computer without spending a lot of money. But then also they had sort of a whole lab full of 3D printers and laser cutters and stuff like that. And I think a few of my local libraries have sort of got bits of equipment like that, and that's, you know, that's seen as quite a big deal in the UK library market space. But these library, you know, the Audi had sort of this in excess, and again, all free to use. You just pay for the materials and that's it. Yeah, definitely really inspiring stuff.
I mean, I was going to say, I love the tech floor, yes, where the studio was and where the tech was that Jake's just described. But actually, my favorite floor was still the books floor. So the books floor was the third floor, the highest floor, and it was the most beautiful library space I've ever been in. And design, obviously, astonishing, but also the striking thing about it was how incredibly well used it is. There were just people everywhere, and every seat had somebody sat in it reading or chatting or playing a game that they were borrowing, or sitting out on the balcony overlooking the government building and a big square in the lake in the distance and reading a book. It was just amazing.
I was going to say something similar, because I think we were all there about a week, and at least half of us went there 2 or 3 times, not just once. And just like you said, it's really a space that's great to hang out. Either the second floor, because there are like loads of people who are just sitting on the steps, like with their laptop plugged in, or with other people chatting, working, but also on the book floor, on the top floor, because it's such a lovely space and it's so functional. So it does have, I mentioned like people with their laptops, because it's well designed enough that there are sockets everywhere and comfy seats. So it makes you want to just spend time in the space. And like, I loved also the fact the balcony is called the Citizens Balcony, but it overlooks the Parliament, as you said. But it really highlights also, yes, that space belongs to the citizens. And so it's not just about the services, about making the space their own, or and really having that feeling, or just, yeah, you go to the library just to hang out. It's not just to use the services.
Yeah.
And Odd and I had the pleasure of, I think some of you didn't, seeing the shelving robots that were operating the lifts going down to the basement, collecting some books. So little warning there to all librarians worried about their shelving duties.
I heard you'd done more to irritate the shelving librarian, the shelving library robots, than anything else, Jonathan.
We did a good job of obstructing its work, yes.
Unfortunately, it doesn't quite shelve the books yet. It just
No,
brings them back on the floor, and then the human still has to put the book in the right order in the shelf. I'm sure some librarians would rather a robot did that.
So we're also humans too, and not just library professionals. So surely there are some other things more human that we liked about Helsinki and Finland.
The islands, it's just so pretty.
With 300 islands. I mean, it was incredible, wasn't it? Just that boat trip. And
I just felt like it was quite socially different to the UK. Like, it felt so welcoming and safe everywhere. Everywhere was clean. There was water filling points just everywhere, hand washing stations. They recycle everything. Just everything. It was just a lovely place to be. And the city itself is so bijou and pretty. It's like the perfect tourist location, really, just for walking around and enjoying.
Nobody mentioned saunas. I'm almost surprised. You go on the Helsinki tourism information, and like one of the main features is the best saunas in Helsinki.
No time for saunas.
Yeah, I saw a few beaches, but
yes. Oh yes.
The swimming was lovely.
Odd
and Matt and I went for a swim one evening in the Baltic, and it really wasn't Baltic. We decided it needed renaming because it was quite warm. So that was fab. I really loved my running, so I did quite a bit of running while I was there, and anyone who does any running or cycling knows it's one of the best ways of seeing a city, if the city's conducive to good running. And Helsinki is such a city that's conducive to both running and cycling. There are paths everywhere and cycle paths everywhere, and the city is just full of forests. So I was meaning to look up the statistic that you often quote about London being having the highest proportion of green space, and I just wondered how well up the rankings Helsinki falls, because it just felt like every street corner I turned, I ended up in a park or in a forest, and yet still I was in the middle of Helsinki on my run. It was amazing.
We were very fortunate to be there on the annual Night of Culture as well, weren't we? So we came across some fantastic free concerts, some free opera, some free art, and particularly in that rock church, which was made of rock, church made of rock, which was
built inside the rock.
Built inside a rock, yeah, which was, and that concert going on inside there that we just happened to catch the end of that Dvorak violin concerto. It was
amazing,
wonderful, wasn't it?
Yeah, watching the setting sun through these sort of slit windows all around the church, and then hearing this wonderful music. It was amazing.
But I think we're very sometimes forget we're very fortunate people working in the library space, because we do get to see a lot of libraries, and libraries are typically fantastic buildings. Every single one of them has an interesting collection. Every one is inspiring in some way. And we've obviously spoken about Oodi, but we also had an evening at the National Library of Finland, which was a complete contrast, but again, another inspiring building and inspiring collection. Very nice evening.
Okay, well, I think we ought to bring this to a close. Perhaps now's the time to just mention that Kohacon 2024 is already in the planning and takes place next year in the latter half of the summer. Dates completely to be final, exact dates to be finalized, but it's going to be in Montreal in Canada. So if you want the Canadian cultural experience, as well as a wonderful opportunity to visit and meet with librarians from that part of the world and developers and support companies from all over the world, then put it in your diary as soon as we know the dates and get planning your trip, because we'll sure as heck be there in a number. We don't know yet who's going, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of us will be interested in going there. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll put loads of links in the video, so do follow those, and do take a look at our blog, which gives a roundup of the talks we gave at the conference.